So my name's Liz Coan. I'm a psychologist here at Children's, and I work in developmental pediatrics. I work with our Extraordinary Kids Clinic. I work with our Fragile X Clinic, and I do autism assessments as well, and therapy as well. I was just mentioning that before I went to grad school, I was an ABA therapist, so a lot of my background in behavior kind of stems from there. So today's talk, here's my first surprise for you. We're going to talk about behavior management in kids, but truly the principles of behavior are the principles of behavior no matter what. And so we run a class here for parents where parents come without their kids, which is kind of fun to have some time to be with other parents and talk about the things that are going on at home. But we don't require a specific diagnosis for that class. We don't require a specific age group. And the reason why is because this story that we're talking about right now with this 10-year-old, if we apply the same principles to this situation that's going on over here with your 17-year-old, we should be able to problem solve the same way based on the same principles. This is also why I can get my husband to take the garbage out, because it's based on principles like this. Okay, so they kind of transcend the board here. So let's talk about what behavior is. Okay, so behavior is the way in which an animal or person acts in response to a particular situation or stimulus. So stimulus is your first big ABA, traditional science of learning theory word. But this is an important concept that I want to challenge you guys with, because what I would like to see happen at the end of this talk is kind of a shift between looking at behavior as an instance and instead looking at it as part of a bigger chain. Okay? So I want to be friends at the end of this, but I got to tell you some things first. Behaviors are not singular events. They're not singular instances. They do not occur at random. They don't come out of nowhere. How many people are mad at me? Anybody? You're all mad, okay. Yeah, because how many times are you like, I swear to God, everything was fine. He was sitting here, everything was fine. And then out of nowhere, something happened and something changed, right? And we feel like this all the time. So part of what we do in this class is try, instead of focusing on that one instance of behavior, stepping back from it and trying to recognize behavior as a chain. Okay? Exhibit A, the chain. There it is. You guys understand now? The talk is over. Okay. All right. So the ABCs of behavior are as follows. Okay, so before a behavior happens, we have something called the antecedent, right? That's the big A word. And that's like the trigger or setup that happens before a behavior comes to be. So, knock, knock.
Who's there?
How good am I at managing his behavior? Look at that. I said knock, knock. That antecedent caused him to say, who's there? Right? I just shaped your behavior. Magic. Look at that. So saying knock, knock is a pretty good antecedent. With good reliability, someone's going to say who's there afterwards, right? So I'm shaping behavior. Also, I'm probably going to do that again at the next talk because it works so well. I said knock, knock. You said who's there. I got to make my point. I was reinforced. We have a whole behavior sequence. Okay? Behavior is what was said or done. It's observable and visible. Okay? So when we talk about behavior based on these principles of behavior theory, this is really important. It's like third wave psychology that starts talking about things you can't see, like feelings and thoughts. So if you've heard of like cognitive behavior therapy, that's where we try to get into that stuff. In behavior theory, we're talking about just what we can see, an observable action, something we could see or hear. And the consequence is anything that happens after a behavior or a skill takes place. So this is my favorite part of this slide, because a lot of times what happens after a behavior is a reaction, right? Your child engages in a certain behavior, you react to that behavior. Part of what we focus on when we teach this class is trying our hardest to remove the reaction and give ourselves a pause enough to be able to choose a response to the behavior instead of just reacting. Because sometimes our reactions are not the best way to manage the behavior. I know that's like blowing everyone's mind, but it's true. So the consequence is important because this is what makes that behavior or skill more or less likely to occur over time, okay? So let's look at it like this. Okay, so we have the antecedent, the triggering event, or the situation, the setup that brings about a behavior, okay? And then we have something that happens after a behavior that, again, either determines that this behavior is going to happen more in the future or it's not, okay? Now, this is in every textbook that you ever want to look at for the science of behavior, but the part that isn't, that I think is really worth talking about, is this lovely star. And this is where that reaction lives, okay? So when your child turns around and says, I hate you, you're the worst mother, you're not like, thank you, right? Like, that's not what happens. What happens is that there's an emotional response, right? There are thoughts, there are feelings, there are things that go on there that are real. And I think sometimes when we read the theory and we go about trying to implement these things, we don't give enough credit to this star. In class, I say to them, I can't take that star away, and nor would I want to, right? Because this is an important part. Your response or your reaction is an important part of the behavior chain. But what ends up happening a lot of the time is that our child's behavior is the antecedent for our response or reaction, okay? So our behavior. And sometimes that's not the best. And so here's another moment where I get to say, haha, you guys all thought you were coming in here to talk about your kid's behavior. Guess who's wrapped right up into it, right? Because these behavior chains build upon each other. And so it's not just that we're talking about our child's behavior, because we get roped into that sequence in the same way, right? And our sequence follows the same rules. So what we try to do in this class is put the star back in between the behavior and the consequence, and in that moment when we're like, I'm going to kill this kid, right? I'm going to kill him right now. Instead, we say, I need to take a break right now. I'm going to let you calm down, and then we can talk about this in 5 minutes. Right? And then you go to the other room and you said, I'm going to kill this kid, right? You still get to have those feelings, but we want to make a different choice so that we're actually responding to the behavior in a way that we think is helpful based on this science, and not just letting our reaction kind of run the show. Okay, so behaviors. We talked about the fact that they're observable actions. The other thing I want to encourage you guys to think about is that when you guys come in here for a talk on behavior, I know what you come in here thinking. You're thinking about the bad behaviors, right? You're thinking about hitting, you're thinking about talking back, you're thinking about having a meltdown, because that's what comes to mind when we talk about, let's talk about behavior. But truly, behaviors are the good stuff too. And actually, it's even more important for us to have a lens that recognizes the good behaviors, because they follow the same rules in the same chain. So it's not just, wow, he had a really good day yesterday, random. No. What happened, right? What happened first? What was going on in the morning? What happened after he did this wonderful thing? Let's figure out what the bookends are, because that's what helps us encourage that to happen again. We need to actually know way more about the good days than the bad days, because we want to know what's the trick for getting these behaviors to look this good, because that's what we want to replicate, that's what we want to encourage. Good behaviors? Yes. Yeah, not so good. Okay? Both very important. So when we talk about behaviors, we want to be specific. This is really, really important. When we're starting to kind of develop a plan for managing behavior, we want to be specific about what behavior looks like. Because when I say, my kid had a tantrum, you guys all have a picture in your mind right now of what a tantrum looks like, right? Give me some nods. What does a tantrum look like in your mind?
Falling on the floor, screaming.
Screaming, okay. throwing stuff. So these are important details, right? Because I've worked with a kid whose tantrum is literally, I'm going to throw this chair over, I'm going to pull the papers off the wall, right? And then I work with another kid whose tantrum is this, I don't want to, okay? Those are way different, way different. And if I'm working with my first kid on his tantrums, and in a couple weeks I get him to a point where he says, I don't want to, I'm master therapist of the land, right? That is just an amazing improvement. And it's important that we're able to see those improvements, because if my kid is hitting me 10 times a day, every single day, like we'll put it in a therapy session. In a 50-minute therapy session, the kid hits me 10 times, okay? If I get to a day when he hits me 5 times, we are moving in the right direction, and massive improvement has taken place. And I might even say to him at the end of the session, my gosh, such good job with safe hands today, you only hit me 5 times. Here's your prize, right? And people are like, I hate you. This is a terrible talk. But the point is that these improvements need to be celebrated. And if we just have an expectation that the kid who hits me 10 times in a 50-minute session, now that we start the behavior program, the goal is that he'll hit me 0, I'm setting that kid up for failure. He's showing me every single day that he does not have the skill set yet to make a better choice, right? Or to use a different skill. I need to respect that so I can build a behavior program that meets him where he's at. If my expectation is that we're going to go from 10 times hitting in an hour to 0 in a day, I'm a bad therapist. That's not the way to do it. So it's important that we measure these things so that we can see the improvement over time. If you are used to tantrums that are 30 minutes, then we got to know about the day that it was 20, and the day that it was 10, and the day that it was, I don't want to, and then it was over. I mean, we have to know those differences so we can see and go back and say, okay, what was the antecedent here? And what was the consequence here? Because this was an awesome tantrum compared to the one I had last week. Does that make sense? Okay. So where do behaviors come from? Why do they occur? A lot of them are very confusing. The big message here that we need to remember is that all behaviors have a purpose or goal. They have a function, okay? They don't occur at random. So all behaviors have a function. They have a reason they're showing up, something they are trying to accomplish, all behaviors. And you guys are, I hope, in your mind like, this isn't true. I can think of all these behaviors that have no reason for happening. Our job, right, as the caregivers with these kids, is to figure out exactly why it's showing up so that we can understand the behavior and then manage it effectively moving forward. Okay? Behaviors occur because they work. Okay? The science of behavior tells us if a behavior does not work, it won't continue. Now, this is another moment to build our hatred, your hatred for me, which is when you think about some of these behaviors that have been going on for a long time, part of what I'm asking you to do here is think, oh my gosh, it's been working. Somehow this has been working. And it might not feel like that to you because you're like, I don't understand why he does this. I yell at him afterwards, I punish him, I tell him he's been terrible, and he's still doing it. Something's still working about that behavior. Even though you kind of think you're doing your thing to punish, what we're going to learn in here is that in behavior terms, we're not actually punishing a behavior that continues over time. We're actually reinforcing it somehow, right? This is true for both desired behaviors or skills and the undesired ones. Okay, so if we want undesired behaviors to change or go away, 2 things have to happen. The behavior that we don't like must no longer work. Okay, it can't work any longer to get that same goal. And simultaneously, a new desired, more appropriate behavior has to work better. And I think this is where sometimes when behavior plans are put in place, this is a big piece that's left off. They kind of focus a lot on the first part, but don't kind of develop a replacement behavior that allows the child to get that same thing that they want for showing more appropriate skills. And that's called a replacement behavior. So I like this guy. So this is something I talk about all the time in this parent class, which is that I am in the business of saying yes to kids. I want to say yes all the time. I want to give them what they want. I want to say, yes, the world is amazing. Let me show you how amazing it is. Let me get you all the things that you want. But only in the presence of appropriate behaviors, right? So if my kid is having a meltdown in Target, poor Target. Anyone work at Target here? I pick on Target. Target and grandparents get a lot of picking on in this class. But so if the kid goes to Target and is having a screaming meltdown because they want a Hershey bar, right? The science would tell us, well, if we give him the Hershey bar, we're teaching him, hey, you know that yelling and crying thing that you do? Works like a charm if you want a candy bar. Okay, that's what we're teaching him in that moment. However, if I pause and say, excuse me, I can't understand your words, you can ask me it nicely, and the kid says, I want a candy bar, please. Thank you for asking. Here's a candy bar. And the reason why that's okay there is because asking is a way more appropriate behavior than screaming and having a tantrum, right? So it's not that I'm telling the kid, you could never get a Hershey bar. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, I want to give you that Hershey bar. I'm rooting for you. I've got the money right here, right? But you've got to show me a better behavior, because if I give it to you when you're yelling and screaming, I'm reinforcing the wrong behavior. I'm reinforcing yelling and screaming. When I give it to you after you ask, I'm reinforcing the asking, which is a much more appropriate behavior. Okay, so how do we teach good replacement behaviors? It depends on the original behavior's goal or the function of that behavior. And these words, too, are really ABA words, the function of behavior. If you guys have worked with ABA therapists, maybe they've done a functional behavior assessment in the school to kind of determine what are the antecedents and what are the consequences that are happening around this behavior so that they can better manage it. All behaviors have a function. Okay, so this is another mind-blowing moment. But all behaviors that we can think of in the world fall into one of these categories in terms of what the function of the behavior is. First one, attention. Oh my gosh, do we do things for attention? Absolutely. And this is true. I work with a lot of kids who are on the autism spectrum who maybe like to kind of hang out by themselves a little bit. Maybe don't have the strongest social skills. They still want your attention. Attention, this is something all humans engage in behavior to get. Okay, old school ABA terms for this one, access to tangibles. We engage in certain behaviors to get something that we want. Okay, this could be, I want to be front of the line. This could be, I want the Hershey bar. this could be, I want the front seat. Right? But to get something specific that we want. Third function of behavior, escape or avoidance, right? So getting away from those things that are aversive to us. Anybody in here have a child that struggles with anxiety? Okay. Anxiety is one of these things that often, right, if a child is anxious, anxiety comes in and tries to get us out of a situation that makes us feel uncomfortable, right? That's how anxiety tries to protect us. They're like, this feels terrible. I'm going to get out of here, right? But we're avoiding something that we think is aversive, excuse me. And then the fourth function of behavior is a category we call self-stimulatory behaviors. So these are difficult behaviors because the ABC chain that we talked about is all internal. right? So self-stim behaviors might be flapping or rocking back and forth. Typically developing people have some self-stim behaviors too. I used to bite my nails, okay? This is a behavior that the whole chain, right, happens here. And the idea behind these behaviors is that the act of doing it itself is reinforcing, right? So for the kids that I work with that flap, they flap because it helps their body feel more comfortable. But it's a really hard behavior to work with because with other behaviors, the A and the C part kind of exist in the world, and I can change those things. But with self-stim behaviors, it's an internal system. So self-stim behaviors often are the hardest behaviors to change because we have to kind of interrupt a process that we don't have a lot of control over. It can be done, and we can talk about it at the end if we have time, but they're tough. This is just another place for me to have a quick soapbox too. I could care less if kids rock or flap or need to get up, right? Like, who cares really if it's something that helps them feel regulated? We have a group here that we run for guys on the spectrum. One of the guys in there, great student, comes in, he always does his homework, he's super psyched to be there. About 10 minutes in, he gets up and walks back and forth around the class, flapping his hands, which at Children's Hospital Colorado, in the middle of a class with all guys who have kind of developmental differences, this is no big deal, right? Who cares? We don't even say anything about it. But he's in 6th grade, and sometimes this happens in the hallway. Now again, my soapbox would be, let's get into the schools and say, hello everyone. Tommy over here has a little hand flap that he does to help himself feel regulated. And we're all just going to be totally cool with that, right? And we're moving in that direction. We're not quite there yet. And so the other thing we talk about a lot in this class is that you get to be in charge of the behaviors that you want to see look different. No one else should tell you that. You get to decide the behaviors you want to work on. If it's okay for your kid to flap around the dinner table, then cool. Let him flap around the dinner table. You get to choose what's important. Okay, so they basically fall into these two categories, right? So we're either engaging in behavior to get something that we want or to get out of something that we don't want. So when these behaviors develop, essentially what we're talking about, these are skills to communicate, right? Behaviors are attempts to communicate. But what happens over time is that after this ABC chain has been practiced again and again and again, they kind of become habit, right? So it has worked for me for so long to say hello to another person, to start a conversation, that I don't think about it anymore as far as like, maybe I'll say hello to this person, and then maybe they'll respond to me, and then we'll see what happens, right? You don't think about it that way, because it's just worked for so long that now when I see another person, I say hello. Now, this was funny because we were talking about this in class on Friday, and my colleague was like, and when I lived in New York, that wasn't reinforced. I was saying hello to people, and they were like, what's wrong? What's happening here, right? And I'm from New England, so I can kind of own a little bit of that. But so these things that have been practiced again and again and again, they become habit, right? So you're not thinking about them cognitively or actively anymore. You're just doing them. Okay, so behaviors arise due to antecedents, and they're maintained by consequences, okay? So when we think about that chain, gosh, I guess I give my mother a hard time in this talk too. But my mom used to tell me the only person's behavior that you can control is your own, right? And like, she's kind of right? Because the B in the middle, we can't touch that directly. Okay, that lives in the other person. When your kid is having a meltdown, you can't stop the behavior that's already happening there. But what we believe is that by changing things here and by changing things here, we can actually indirectly affect what that behavior looks like in the middle. Does that make sense? So we can't touch that B part directly, but we can change the A and change the C to try to get the B to look different. Yeah, so I think there are a couple things that get that don't get as much attention as they should. One we'll talk about in a minute, which is that behavior plans often are put together based on what a behavior looks like instead of what the function of the behavior is, right? So schools will put a plan in place for hitting. Okay, this is our plan. If he hits, this is what we're going to do. And my opinion is that there's really faulty science to that, because the function, why the behavior is happening, is way more important than what the behavior looks like. So I think people are generally familiar with like ABCs, antecedent, behavior, consequence. But I have to be honest with you, I have been blown away. Like even when I started doing this class, I was like, what are we talking about? Everybody knows this. What? Right? And it's just not so. And it's not so kind of in a lot of situations where you'd think like, oh, you're my son's para? So you know the ABCs of behavior? Oh, you don't? Oh, what are we doing here? You know, like it's not as well known as it should be. The antecedents, the trigger or setup, this thing that brings life to the behavior or could elicit the behavior. Without this initial context, the behavior may not occur. This can be something that immediately precedes the behavior that shows up, or it can be more kind of vague or contextual. So who in here has a child that behaves differently with them than their partner? Yeah, it should be everyone, right? And that's because you're a different person than your partner or your grandma, your mom or whatever. So there are going to be different ABC chains that are going on when you're interacting with that person versus someone else. I know I behave different with my mom than my dad. So the other thing to think about here, poor Target again, but like I had a kid that like had such meltdowns whenever the family went to Target that the way that we decided to manage the behavior first was a big change in the antecedent, which was don't go to Target, right? And I was like, thank you, I'm an amazing ABA therapist, right? This behavior's not happening anymore. That took a week. So, and that's fine. Like if that's where your family's at, it's like, look, I've got a million other things going on. Right now, I'm just not gonna take the kid to Target because I can't deal with it. One second. And, but what I say is at some point, right, it's probably gonna be beneficial to target, because there's gonna be a day when you're, you know, running errands and, oh man, he's in the car, but I've gotta go to Target. And we've got to manage it, right? And so the reason I bring this up is because, again, you get to choose. You get to choose when these things are worth targeting for you. And that's important because I know y'all have 80,000 people around you saying, you're going to let him talk to you like that? Or you don't bring him to Target? Or this is what you should do, right? It's not helpful. It's not. You know, your kids are on their own path, and that's what we need to respect mostly, not the shoulds of the world that are telling us, you know, what they should be able to do right now. But, you know, if you're going to target for a kid that has been having a meltdown every time they walk in, you got to be ready to buckle down, right? Like, we have to decide, okay, this is our plan. This is how we're going to implement it. These are the antecedents we're going to put in place. These are the consequences. So that you feel kind of armed with a plan for when this starts. Because if we don't think that through, we go to Target, our star blows up when they have a meltdown, and then all of a sudden we're buying them a Hershey bar because they're screaming, I hate you. And we're like, wait, this isn't what I was supposed to do, right? So I think we just have to be thoughtful when we're gonna take on a project, like, okay, this is the behavior I wanna see change, and we're gonna go after it. We gotta do it in a thoughtful way. And you know, there's no like one answer, right? The psychologist answer for everything is it depends. Yes. Okay. I know you guys love that. But yeah, I think sometimes you guys know better than I do that you have to pick your battles, right? Yeah, I do a lot in this class too about creative ways to say no. Because I don't say no very much to kids. Here's another thing you guys should know. I do not have kids. You guys, you hate me? You hate me. This is a disclaimer, and I say it at the beginning of our course here at Children's too, because you know, I'm talking about working with kids in a 50-minute session once a week in a controlled setting with a security guard down the hallway, with a team of psychologists in any room around me where I can say, can you come here, come help me with this? That's not real life, right? And so, especially over the course of the class that we teach here, it's 7 weeks, I tell stories about kids that I've worked with, and I sound awesome, sound very awesome. I sound very good at my job. But helping a kid manage behavior for 50 minutes a day once a week is not the job that you guys have. And I would never assume to, like this class that we teach, it is not a parenting class. You guys know how to be parents. I do not know how to be parent. But what we do believe is that, you know, I know a lot about the science of behavior. And so our belief is that knowing a little bit more about learning theory and the science of behavior may be able to help manage behavior more effectively. But it is not about parenting. So yeah, I know, we're off to a great start, our relationship. So this is a visual that is used often on a unit here called the Neuropsychiatric Special Care Unit, which is an inpatient unit for individuals with developmental differences and other mental health concerns. But I really like this visual because when we talk about antecedents, look at all of the things, right, that can contribute to what behavior looks like. You know, the person that you're with, the environment that you're in, your internal state. My God, you guys, don't come talk to me at 11:30 today because I'll be hangry because lunch hasn't happened yet. Right? And that will put me, I'll show different behaviors when that's the case. When you haven't had sleep, you show different behaviors. Sensory sensitivities, right? Gosh, we have guys that come into our clinic, and I know before they come into my room, I'm gonna dim those lights, right? And that's me changing the antecedent so that when he walks in, we don't have to deal with a meltdown because I'm controlling the environment to try to see different behaviors emerge, right? Medical issues, pain, illness, seizures, especially for our guys who can't communicate this to us with their words. It means we're doing a lot of detective work a lot of the time, being like, what's happening with this behavior? Like, is he sick? Does he not feel well? Did something happen at school? Because we don't have a lot of time that verbal information where they come home and say, I've had a terrible day, so my mood is off, and my behavior may also be impacted. Right? That's not what we're working with. Okay? Mental health, we talked a little bit about anxiety, right? Anxiety can contribute to what your behavior looks like. Depression, ADHD. Time of day. Today is Sunday. I left the house, my husband was still asleep. I have learned that if I need to ask my husband, what is it that we're gonna do today? What's our plans? What are we getting done? We don't have that conversation until after noon, okay? Because before noon, it doesn't work. Okay, I've learned it doesn't work. It's very unhelpful. So at like 12:01, I'm like, hello, let's talk about the day. Skill deficits, right? So with the conditions that we're talking about, we know that they come along with certain skill deficits. I really understand a lot of behavior as manifestations of skill deficits, right? If I'm not able to communicate what I need, that can lead to frustration and can lead to me engaging in other behaviors. I get in trouble for this too. I really don't believe that kids are just bad, man. They're not trying to be difficult. I really think that when we see bad behavior or undesired behavior, it's because they don't have the skills yet to make a better choice more consistently, right? And so that's where we come in to be able to help them make better choices on a more consistent basis. Expectations, right? This is why it's really important, you know, in the work we do cognitive testing, evaluations, but gosh, it's really, really a big deal if we have a 10-year-old who actually cognitively is more like a 4-year-old, and we've been expecting him to do the same work in the classroom that all of his peers are doing. No wonder he hates school, right? It gives us a little context. So obviously you can think right now, what are some of the things that come along with these conditions that may contribute to what behavior looks like? And these are all the things that are going on under the surface, and then we get to see the lovely tip of the iceberg, which a lot of times is a behavior that we don't really like that much. So the reason why we do this, though, is to create some compassion for what our kids are going through. A lot of times in this class, I get parents come in and they say, well, you know, I just don't know if he's hitting me because he has autism, if he's hitting me because he's anxious, if he's hitting me because he's 5. I just don't know. And honestly, the answer to that is it doesn't really matter, because the question to ask is that a behavior that you want to see continue? Yes or no? Right? Because that's what we're going to shape our plan on. I work with a lot of guys with autism, and they hit, right, because they can't communicate effectively using their language. So I understand why they hit. They still can't hit me. It's not an acceptable behavior, right? And so it allows us to understand and have some compassion for where some of these behaviors are coming from, but it doesn't mean they're okay. We still need to teach our child that biting or hitting or saying I hate you to your friends is not okay. So consequences, what are they? So consequences are the things that happen after the behavior, right? This is what will determine whether a behavior will occur again over time in the future. And the consequences relate directly to the goal or the underlying function of the behavior. Okay, so what we want to figure out when we see behaviors show up, we're like, okay, what happened? What did the child get from this? You know, he engaged in this behavior. What happened after? Did this work for him? Or what did he get out of by engaging in this behavior? Because these are clues for us to know what to shift or to change. Here's another little shift that we're going to go on together. So consequences come in 2 categories. And this is important because we're talking about now behavior science language. A lot of people, when they hear consequences, they think, oh, you mean discipline, punishment. And actually, punishment is a very specific type of consequence, and reinforcement is a very specific type of consequence as well. So the definition of punishment in behavior science terms means that it will make the behavior less likely to occur over time. Okay? It is only a punisher if the behavior goes down, if it's reduced. It's not a punisher on its own. It's only a punishment if the behavior decreases over time. Reinforcement is the flip of that, okay? When a behavior has been reinforced, it means the goal of the behavior has been met, and it makes that behavior more likely to occur over time. So it increases or encourages that behavior over time. Target, oh God. So I bring this up because a lot of times when you're in crisis mode, you're in Target, you're in the checkout line, you've got 2 other kids with you, we've got one kid having a meltdown, we've got Mrs. Jones behind you going, you're a bad parent, right? And the kid's yelling and they want candy, whatever, and we have grandma come in and said, I know how to figure this out, let's just throw some candy at him, okay? Because what will happen in the moment, he'll stop. Yeah, right? Kids crying for a Hershey bar. Oh my gosh, I know how to fix this situation. Here, child, have this Hershey bar. The kid will stop crying, for sure, right? What happens next week? Yeah. And actually, it may start as we walk through the door this time into Target. And I feel like it's important to mention, too, sometimes when I talk about this stuff, I feel like I'm painting kids as like Stewie, you know, like, now I'm in Target. And what will I do today to get the things that I want? And the honest truth about these principles is that you don't need to cognitively understand them for them to work, right? So this is why babies cry, infants cry, right? Because they need something, they cry, we go get them, and they get the things that they need, right? No infant is thinking, I shall cry now to get the milk that I desire, right? That's like not what's happening. But it's a learned response. So this is true of our kiddos too, right? They are going to learn through experience that, gosh, when I cry, I'm not getting the things that I want. But gee, when I say, Mommy dearest, may I please have this Hershey bar? This is working much, much better. So we have to have that goal looking at over time, because otherwise we get caught in these instances, right, where we think we're doing something. We just got to get him to stop crying. I'll get him to stop crying. But it really is the impact over time that we have to have an eye on. Does that make sense?
Does it, in your opinion, does a child understand will their thought process be, wow, if I say this, or at what age maybe does that begin,
yeah,
that I'll get what I want?
So it depends. It depends on the functioning level of the child, right? It depends on their cognitive ability, their language ability. When kids get older, we can involve them in this process more directly. Today we're going to go to Target. Okay? When we're in Target, I need to see safe feet. I need to see quiet voice. And if I can see safe feet and quiet voice, then when we get to the end, you can pick out a candy. If I don't see safe feet and a quiet voice, then today we won't get a candy. So there are kids who are able to do that. But in the meantime, what we want to remember is that just doing it again and again and again with the child will teach it experientially. And I think that's what we forget, that that's something that's happening. Guys, we're going to get into some heavy stuff now with the negative minutes we have left. Okay, this is like higher level stuff. I'm just doing this to be comprehensive. It's going to like bend your mind a little bit. So within each of these categories, reinforcement, that is what makes behavior more likely to continue over time. And in punishment, what makes behavior go down over time, there are two subcategories. When we talk about positive and negative in these terms, we're talking about them like math terms. We're not talking about them like desired, undesired. So positive reinforcement is adding something to the situation that was not there before that reinforces the child's behavior and makes it more likely to continue over time. So Johnny turns in his homework. The teacher says, great job on this homework. This was excellent. That praise is positive reinforcement, adding something that wasn't there before. And we know it will be positive reinforcement if day 2 Johnny comes in and turns in his homework. So the behavior is, continuing over time. Negative reinforcement is taking something away from a situation that then makes that behavior more likely to continue in the future. When baby is crying, that's an aversive sound. I want the crying to stop. I'll go pick up baby, crying stops, negative reinforcement. The thing that was aversive is gone away, okay? And will also shape my behavior for next time. Now when the baby's crying, I'll go pick him up right away because this works. Punishment's the same deal. Positive punishment, adding something to the situation that wasn't there before for the purpose of punishing the behavior or having the behavior get reduced over time. Positive punishment is a lot of our kind of traditional parenting strategies. Yelling at a child, spanking, right? Those are positive punishments, meaning you're adding something that wasn't there before. Negative punishment, taking things away that then make that behavior less likely to continue in the future. Grounding, taking away the tablet, taking away TV, okay? The most powerful way to change behavior, any guesses? Positive reinforcement. It works the best out of all of these. Anyone know what works the worst? Positive punishment. It just doesn't work as well, especially for our kids who learn differently. As a typically functioning teenager, when my mom grounded me, it worked, man. It threw my whole world off. I was like, this is terrible. My mom hates me. I have an anxiety disorder, but whatever, right? But like it worked for me because it changed my behavior. I didn't want it to happen again. But a lot of times for our kids that just learn a little bit differently, things need to be a little bit more concrete. And so these strategies don't work as well as getting reinforcement for the behaviors that are good. So these are all examples of consequences, okay? And the question for you guys is, which one of these are punishers and which ones of these are reinforcement? It's a trick question, okay? Because it depends on whether the behavior continues over time or it doesn't, right? For a kid who never gets to see dad and he gets in trouble at school and mom says, wait till your father gets home, right? That's another traditional parenting strategy. And dad comes upstairs and they sit on the bed and they talk for an hour about what happened at school today. I don't know. Let's see what that kid does when he goes back to school the next day, because it may be awesome to, even if it's, I'm disappointed in you. It's awesome to get that FaceTime, right? I have kids, verbal praise, man, gosh, that's something I do all the time. I have kids, that is not a reinforcer. Actually, if I say, you did really, really well on this, he's like, what can I do now to make you angry, right? Like, it's actually an antecedent for bad behavior, right? So it's important that we don't put value in these things on their own, right? It depends on what they do to the behavior chain. That's how we know whether it's a reinforcement or not, or a punishment or not. Timeout, another great one. Love this. So the kid in preschool who hates timeout, hates it. I hate timeout. Comes over to the circle, pops the kid next to him in the face, and the preschool teacher runs over, oh gosh, we have to have safe hands. We have to go to timeout, right? And this baby is like, or the preschooler's like, I just did this, right? He got out of a situation he didn't want to be in. But in the preschool classroom, it could be that like, timeout is our punishment for inappropriate behavior. But it doesn't work if the kid didn't want to be there anyway, right? Whereas the other buddy in preschool who loves circle time more than anything because he now knows all the wheel the bus, animations, and he can't wait to be there, and he comes down and he's so excited and he pops his friend in the face by accident, and the teacher comes over and says, we have to have safe hands, we have to go to timeout. I don't know, right? I think that might work for that kid, especially if the next day he's like walking to the circle like, so excited to be here, but I don't want to make anything happen, right? That's what would tell us over time if these are working for the chain that exists. So I love this, right? Because this goes on all the time. It's like, did you say those reinforcers don't work? Oh, then they're not reinforcers. By definition, right? A reinforcer is only something that's going to make the behavior more likely to continue over time. If it's not doing that, then you don't have a reinforcer on your hands, right? When I'm saying good job to the kid who doesn't want to hear that, I'm not doing this right. And it's not because this thing doesn't work, it's because I've got it in the wrong place in the chain. The consequence we choose, how we respond, depends on the behavior's function, not the behavior itself. And so this is the other thing that I think is forgotten a lot of time when we implement behavior, or when behavior programs are implemented in schools, is that again, they make a plan for hitting instead of hitting in specific situations where we know what the function is. Because if I'm hitting you to get your attention, then the way that we respond to that, which would be to withdraw attention, is different than if the kid's hitting me because they want a Hershey bar, or they're hitting me because they want to get out of doing math, or they're hitting me because it's a stim, right? So I would make totally different behavior plans for each of those because they're all different functions. Does that make sense? Okay. But so what we've learned now about the science of behavior, right, is that we know that positive reinforcement makes behavior more likely to continue over time. That's what the science tells us. In a given day, we only have so much time to engage in so many behaviors, right? So we have all these nice behaviors that we like, brushing teeth, using manners, doing chores. We have these behaviors we don't like so much, and then we have the neutral, and I always bring this up in the class, and they're like, well, my kid doesn't sleep, so And I'm like, okay, sorry. But there is part of the day, right, that is neutral. But so now, knowing this theory, knowing how the science of behavior works, if we focus on these behaviors that we really, really like and make sure that they're positively reinforced, then just by doing that, those behaviors are going to happen more, right? That's what the science tells us. If they're reinforced, they're going to happen more and more, which literally makes less time in the day, right, for these other behaviors to be happening. Because also in theory is that we're not reinforcing these behaviors anymore, so they're not working. So by definition, they're going to go down. Which parts of the ABC framework can we directly change? The A and the C. You guys are awesome. The B we can't touch directly, right? It's just by adjusting the A and C that we would get to the B in the middle. Oh, what's the most powerful form of behavior change? Positive reinforcement. You guys are A's, getting A's. What are the main functions of all behavior? There are 4 types. Avoidance. Attention. Yep, getting the things you want. And self-stim. Awesome. What form of consequence makes behavior less likely to occur in the future? Punishment. Right. Yeah, punishment in general. That's just what makes behavior less likely to occur in the future.